are these people?
So speaking of organizing,
Yeah.
so last talk that I recorded is none other from Chris Miles himself. And many of you know we wrote a Substack on him early, like in the fall of last year. We had some people say not so nice things to us about what we said, but I think we gave a very balanced view of him, in terms of like we appreciate and admire what he has done to kind of help this labor movement up and like elevate it to a point where people are now talking about it in light of his situation at JFK 8, which we commend him for, and we appreciate him for that, and others who have kind of stepped up to elevate labor like that. But we did have some critiques in terms of how the message is being put out in mainstream media in particular, and even in some cases in independent media spaces. And I think I'm going to share that later, but I think those of you, I should have put the Substack in, but those of you who've read the Substack, you can go to indienews.network. You can find our links. You can find a Substack. You can find, our article where we wrote about Chris. You can also view our live stream where we kind of went through the Substack article about Chris as well. But all that to say, I appreciated him being there. To come out and show respect and give solidarity to Tina in favor of Poushawn. So
For sure.
He's going to speak now. He has some things that I think are very interesting, I think in terms of how we've kind of covered him last year to what he's saying now. So I'll let him speak and then we'll talk about it.
I don't know about y'all, but I'm pissed off. It's not the way I really wanted to bring in 2023. So I'm going to apologize because my energy is kind of low today because, I just had to attend a funeral yesterday. Just had the news of somebody else in my family passing away. And now I'm here reminiscing this moment when I found out about Poushawn 2 years ago. So I got a bunch of feelings going through me right now, and the most prominent one is anger right now. And it's only because, like our comrade said earlier, we're back out here again. 2 years of fighting and advocating for Pooh and her daughter Gabby, and nothing. All we get is a couple of articles here and there, get a couple of videos out on social media here and there, and a couple inquiries here and there. Some interest with journalists, but there's no fight for a black woman. This right here is a civil rights moment. And I shouldn't be the only one that's representing labor, or the union, the Amazon Labor Union by itself shouldn't be the only one. Other politicians and prominent people that are silent about this issue, that know about this issue, because I personally brought it to their attention. And I know Christina has done a number of phone calls in the last couple of weeks to some prominent people that's going to help, hopefully. But to be here 2 years later without justice is inhumane by itself. So I'm going to fill in some gaps. What happened when I found out 2 years ago. It wasn't from the news, wasn't from social media. It was from another worker in that warehouse. The same warehouse where Pooh worked. Another worker reached out to me and said, there's some things going on with COVID, and here's a situation about a worker who was testing. And I seen her every day testing other employees. Amazon swept it under the rug, didn't mention anything about it. I had no clue until this worker brought it to my attention. So I did some research and due diligence. I found the GoFundMe, which at the time only had a couple $100s in it, because Christina was doing it by herself. Amazon didn't help them, didn't offer them no money, didn't offer no funeral service, money, relief, or anything. And the first thing I did was reach out to Christina and ask for permission to even talk to her about her sister's death. And when I finally had that conversation, it was a no-brainer for me. I reached out to Jordan from Status Quo. Next thing you know, we raised money to help, just to help get them past the burial and whatever else is needed at that time. Nowhere near the price of her life. Breadcrumbs, if you ask me. And that wasn't enough for me. We brought Christina to several demonstrations in New York City. We brought Christina in front of Jeff Bezos' mansions in New York City, as well as here. We advocated for Poushawn ever since we found out about it. And once again, I'm pissed off because we get nothing in return but grief and hardship of being in the streets. But this year is different. Like Christina said, we're not going to give up. We're not going to give up. We are going to get justice this year. I know a number of people who've already received settlements from Amazon for other reasons, non-related to wrongful death, because that's exactly what this is. This is wrongful death. She should have never been put in that position. I don't care what anybody say. Everybody's want to know, how did she die? What did she die from? The bottom line is she should have never been put in that position. None of them should have. That's the part that has to be held accountable, first and foremost. But I absolutely believe in my heart, and nobody can tell me otherwise, that had she not been in that position, she'd still be here today. No vaccine at the time, no PPE, no N95, no surgical gloves, no gown, no plexiglass in the warehouse. And she was testing next to the workstations on the other side. And I have pictures to prove it. Have all of this. Have everything. She emailed the management warning them that people were coming in there positive. They turned a blind eye. And even after she passed, the only thing they offered the family was 2 months of counseling. 2 months. That expired over a year ago. So just think about that for a second. The richest man in the world at one point in time. Somebody was making $13 billion. $13 billion a day the day she died. $13 billion a day. $9 million an hour. Almost $5,000 a second. A second. And they did nothing for this family. So we're here to remind them we're not going anywhere. We want justice for Pooh, and we want justice now. And I don't have the energy today to really scream at the top of my lungs as much as I want to. And I've done that thousands of times. our actions are going to scream louder than our words. I'm going to tell you that right now. Our actions are going to scream louder than our words. I want Jeff Bezos to know that. We're here, and we're not going nowhere. We will be back. And every dog has his day. And I can tell you now, Christina's a fighter. She's probably more of a fighter than I am. And I will be damned if I don't see her get justice. So I want to thank y'all all for showing up today. And don't just make this a one-day thing. Don't just leave here and forget about it. She's right here in D.C. We're in New York. We're not going to be able to travel down all the time. But when this black woman calls, somebody got to answer the phone over here. I know I will, and I know my team will. I know the union will. But we need the community as well. This is a community fight. This is a people fight. This is a working class fight. This is a civil rights fight. So it's time for us to pick up the phone. It's time for us to share this on social media. Tell our neighbors, tell our friends, tell our family members, tell our household that Poushawn deserves justice. Just like anybody else. Just like George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Poushawn Brown is here. So please, say her name.
Poushawn Brown.
Say her name.
Poushawn Brown.
Say her name.
Poushawn Brown.
Poushawn Brown? That name?
Say her name.
Yep.
I know we talked about this Monday when we were talking through it to prepare for tonight, but I know you had some thoughts
a little bit
about this.
Yeah. Like, I mean, there's definitely a couple of spots. Like, I mean, obviously, I should probably start by saying that, like, my support for Poushawn Brown is not necessarily the same as my support for the union. I feel like those two things can be supported separately, you know?
Mm-hmm. Right.
Because there's definitely issues with ALU. Having said that, you know, I appreciate Smalls being out here for this, for sure. You know, I'm sure there's countless opportunities for him to do similar, you know, and would like to see that. I think there's a couple of things that I haven't heard necessarily any action requested other than support, which is like, what does that mean? Do you mainly need financial support? If so, what for? Like,
and he mentioned Jordan, and
yeah,
I do want to commend Jordan here for helping as far as,
and it was in 2020, so the problems with Jordan weren't necessarily as apparent as they are now.
But you know,
I don't
money
know
is
why
finite.
That was the only one called, because there were others, you know.
Well, I mean, we talked about this, but like, we didn't exist then.
Yeah.
RBN didn't exist then.
Not to the extent that, there's a bunch of people that didn't exist then. But there were people that did. There's also plenty of, like, labor leaders, and mainly not supposed to leaders, I mean, like, journalists, you know.
Right.
There were some around, for sure.
Right. But keep in mind what was going on around her death.
Yeah.
Forced to vote, and then January 6th.
Yes.
Immediately after that. So that was kind of, and I think for me, that's kind of why I probably either didn't know about it or did know about it but forgot. Because January 6th just took up the sound waves everywhere. As well as forced to vote on the independent media side just prior to that. And I think for me, like, having to invest that time in forced to vote, I totally missed the story about Poushawn. But as I was saying to you just now, you know, like, Jordan, good on you to help this family financially, you know, by a status coup. But money is finite. you know, money can only do so much. Giving money is not going to get Poushawn back. And so I do agree with you, Reef. Like, the call to action, I think, and this is kind of what we said in the Substack, we've just been kind of curious from AOU. Like, what actions are you
Right.
taking
What justice
to
would you like to
elevate-
see? Right.
to elevate her story?
Yeah.
To elevate the Amazon workers that we've spoken about, to elevate Matt Terrell's story that we've had on the show several times,
Yeah.
and him sharing about his experiences. Like, this is the stuff that should be talked about in mainstream and independent media. I don't fucking care about Jeff Bezos. Not to say he's not the issue, but he's not the problem. The problem is
one of, but yes,
he's one of, but not
Yeah.
the big boss. You know, and going back to what Angela Davis said, we need to seize control from the elites. So my question to Smalls and ultimately the ARU is, how are you seizing the narrative so that you have control over what is getting put out there? Instead of trying to go through the normal channels. Like, he's gone to the White House, he has spoken to Bernie and AOC, you know, like, he's going through everything in the normal channels, and that hasn't gone anywhere. And I sensed it, and I probably will say this now. I did speak to him briefly after this. I didn't record it. I didn't think it was appropriate at this point. But, you know, if any of you know, I kind of had, you know, we kind of had a little Twitter feud over the summer.
Yeah, we've had some back and
And
forth
I went,
for sure.
yeah. And I went to him. I was like, hey, look, man, I'm not sure if you remember me. You know, you and I had a thing on Twitter a little bit. I apologize if I came off adversarial. But we want to be in a position to help Poushawn and all Amazon workers have their stories heard. And we want to be in a position where we can help collectively, you know, with, you know, Holland's Media, RBN, all these other channels that we're connected with, to help elevate these stories, to force mainstream media and even the larger channels that really don't talk about this unless if it's a trending topic to light. Like, and I asked him then, you know, like, because we tried to interview not Chris, like anyone in the AOU, to kind of talk about like how we can support, you know, elevating these stories. And, you know, Chris was like, you know, I don't know, like, you have to get to my assistant. And I said, okay, we will do that. So by the way, Indy, just remind me, please, to email that.
Yeah.
But he's tired.
Yeah.
And someone said in the chat, like, I think it was Joe, who said he looked tired. He was tired.
Well, and we've
Because,
talked about it frequently about like, bro, you can't be the only one.
right,
It can't be you, man. Like the
right.
you know, Colin's favorite, you know, Kwame Ture talks about Superman only exists in movies.
Right.
Like
Right.
you got to have other spokesmen to the ALU so that you're not the only one speaking for it. You know?
Right.
So
I just feel like Chris has become so much of the figurehead for ALU that the pressure is getting to him now.
yeah.
And I think he's beginning to see, and again, this is just speculation, but I think he's beginning to see like the efforts that he's trying to make in the normal traditional channels have not necessarily worked out in his favor in terms of, in this case for Poushawn's story, getting her justice.
Yeah.
Because ultimately, in this case, that's what you should be for. Not Jeff Bezos sucks. We know that. And it's easy to rally around that. But
Right.
most people in the country don't know about Poushawn's story.
Yes.
Most people do not know, Matt, the Trell story. Most people do not know about the Amazon workers that we have spoken to and have heard their stories of all the stuff that they had to go through.
Yeah.
So that needs to be elevated. So that being said, we gotta play it again. You know, we
Yep.
gotta play our man here. Especially those who are new. If you're new, if you're not new, you got to hear it again from me, probably like the 100th time. But for those of you who are new, this is what our spiritual advisor, Kwame Ture, said many years ago in terms of organization and mobilization.
Verse 9, chapter 6.
Verse 9, chapter
Corinthians.
6.
Sure
Sure
You
thing.
must not get confused between mobilization and organization. The confusion can be compounded if one doesn't study properly Dr. King and doesn't know him. Dr. King was one of the greatest mobilizers this century's ever seen, but he never organized. He was not an organizer. And for him, he didn't need organizing. After all, Dr. King was a reformist. When you're a reformist, all you need to do is to put pressure on the people to tell them to do right. That's all Dr. King saw as his job, was to put pressure on the American government to show them that they should live up to the Constitution. That was his task.
Just in case people were wondering. That.
Right. And I feel that's what we're doing now. Like,
Are
I
you
feel
a
like that's what
reformist?
we gotta use.
Or are
Right.
you an
Just-
organizer?
Right. Just do right. Do right by Poushawn. Like, that's not enough.
Yeah.
That's not enough for Amazon workers. Keep going.
When you want power, you organize. Because you don't want to put influence, you want to seize power for yourself and do for yourself what you're putting pressure for the others to do for you.
Like,
That's what I want
yes.
from Amazon workers. Like,
Power, you mean? Yeah, absolutely.
power.
How do you keep this
That's
from
what
happening
Poushawn-
again?
Right. How do we keep this from happening again? How can we have no more Poushawns after this
Yes.
and ensure that this doesn't happen again? And I feel that Chris is not necessarily speaking to that.
Right. Or what solutions he has to that. You know?
Right. So, but as I said, the thing that I think we need to work on, and I think that this is the thing that if we ever had someone from AU on, is what we want to ask them is, what are your things that you're thinking about in terms of seizing the means of the narrative in terms of the communication that you want to have out in the media?
Right.
Because really
Where's
all of the
ALU
media right
TV?
now is like, right, like having an arm of ALU, a social media presence, even like a YouTube channel or something where you're able to report on these stories as they happen without having to kind of wait or try and hope for the right journalist
Right.
or the right politician to elevate those stories,
Yep.
you know? So you should be able to report on this kind of like we are able to do in real time,
Yes.
you know?
Hear from the
Our
workers.
force of votes,
You
Right.
know, you should have like, you guys have all that information. The rest of this media doesn't. And you can decide what is put out and what isn't. And, you know, like, I think that's been a lot of our issue with Smalls in particular, and in turn the ALU, is what they're willing to do for outreach and visibility when they could own that power themselves,
right,
you know? So,
right,
and then you don't have to sell your soul in that regard, you know? And if you do sell your soul, you got something to pitch to the devil while you're there. So,
Right.
you know, but
and
that's us.
I have to, and just one other thought. This is, and I don't want to bring Jordan up again, but this is kind of what, again, going back to the Substack article that he wrote over Christmas. Has he met Chris since he's interviewed him.
Yeah, like
You know,
been a minute.
Right. Jordan was like, take a break.
Yeah,
Chris just told you he
don't.
can't.
Right.
Cannot. Especially given the weight that he has to, like, I can imagine just what he is thinking about. You know? Can Tina take a break? You know? Her sister's still dead. And she hasn't got any justice for her wrongful death. And it's been 2 years.
Yep.
Or any other Amazon worker who is trying to organize around this right now, or any activists in general. You know, Dr. Africana said in terms of thinking about her brethren in Africa, she cannot sleep at night knowing the idea that Africans are leaving the very place that is their mother. That haunts her. So, but I also say this in regards to independent media. We gotta do better in terms of the stories we cover. Yeah, I mean, we get it. Like, the drama helps the algorithm. It helps with the clicks. It helps with, getting your channel recognized, and like people we can admit we all like the drama. But if we continue to do that, how are we any different from mainstream media?
Well, and I think that's the thing me and you, talk about frequently as far as what we choose to cover.
Right.
There's definitely a few of that's worth it, and like 10% is one thing, but I think it relates to Touré's other, subject of like, of you have to fight for what you're for, and that's more fighting what you're against,
Right.
and I think that's a big deal when in regards to, it helps to have what you want on the receipt when you're asking for stuff. Make sure those and having an outreach arm to talk about what that is and what those should be, and figuring out what that is, that should be part of the process, and you need to openly communicate what that is. And I don't think they've done that as effectively as I wish they would. So our first super chat.
Our first super chat ever.
Yay.
And it has to come from our friend Oz. Thank you.
King of Kings.
And he says, can you define independent media? I think you just did.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's independent media as a whole, the way we talked about it. Everyone tries to say like what, the space, quote unquote, right? Well, we had to give it a name, as opposed to just the space that does not have one. So we started using independent media, right? We defined it as such of not taking corporate money in any way, shape, or form, just like independent politicians or whatever. But also it relates to independent thought. I feel like that's important because most of the time, we do have to work alongside people we don't necessarily agree with all the time. So that was also part of it for us. So I think holding true to both those definitions of independent, it is part of that, So
yeah, I think for me, and you said this, like, there's a reason why there's certain stories we don't cover. Practically, it's like you don't need to hear the same story from 10 different places.
Yeah.
Number one. Some of it is necessary. But if you really wanted to watch certain things, we will tell you, go to this channel and watch it.
Well, things that are like direct stuff, like for instance, the Uhuru movement, they have direct like wants and desires, and make sure those are known. You know,
Right.
like those singular issue groups of, you know, that are doing these singular issue actions, I think are a whole lot easier, a whole lot harder, I should say, to infiltrate and co-opt, for one, because most people are on the same page, you know, when in regards to those issues. And same thing with the media that you watch. It's part of that same thing. But yeah, it's just, you know,
Yeah.
I don't know.
I think basically for me, independent media means, as I said, seizing the power of control in terms of
Yeah.
what should be talked about and the things that are not,
Right.
and having the freedom to be able to do that from the perspective of the people who should share it.
And
And as I said, like, I'm glad that I'm in DC, and I'm glad that Afeni and Indy told me about this rally, that I had the means to go and record it on my phone,
yeah.
and being able to talk with some activists and Chris, but mostly Tina directly, and ask Tina especially what she wanted. And I think our mission is what she wants, is the story of not just her sister, but for people like her to get out there,
Yeah.
And so again, I wanted to make sure that I held my word in doing that for her. So that being said, I'm very grateful for you guys for coming on. Very grateful for you guys for watching. And I just ask you again, please share this stream. We will clip it so that you can hear each talk.
Yeah.
And we're probably going to make smaller clips from that. But as I said, this is what independent media should be doing, to cover stories like these, and
Yep.
to elevate them so that we're able to challenge the mainstream media and kind of force them to kind of talk about these issues that we care about or are pertinent to the working class in particular.